we all know we're in tough times, and we're a little bit worried about the country falling apart and literally breaking apart. It's not like we didn't try it before. So we brought on an expert here to talk about whether that's a real possibility. And I get a little bit of a sense that he might not even mind. So that'll be interesting. We'll talk about that. Richard Kreitner is a contributing writer at The Nation, and he's written the book, Break It Up, Secession, Division, and the Secret History of America's Imperfect Union. So obviously everybody knows about the Civil War, but what other secret history do we have about efforts to break up the country before?
Sure. I mean, when I got interested in the idea, obviously the first thing that we associate with secession is slavery, the Confederacy, the South, and the political right. But I quickly found that there's almost no region of the country, few states, and few groups of people that haven't tried to leave at one time or another. Disunion, the idea that it should all break apart, was really originally a northern idea. A New England secession movement grew up under Jefferson's presidency and then nearly did break away during the War of 1812. And then similarly, the heroes of my book sort of are the New England abolitionists who wanted to secede from the Union to protest slavery and to withdraw what they saw as material support for the institution. And I don't think that we're generally taught that. The association of slavery with the Confederacy has convinced us that it's not an available, and by us I mean the left, that it's not an available option for our politics today. And I think that knowing a fuller history of the concept and all the different people who have espoused it over the years should disabuse us of that notion.
Well, it's interesting because that particular abolitionist movement, I believe, proved to be wrong. So what do I mean by that? Well, if they had gotten their way and the North had broken up with the South, there's some chance the South would still have slavery, and there'd still be millions of African Americans enslaved. Luckily, the North decided to stick together in a fight and to risk getting killed themselves to free the slaves. So it kind of reminds me a little bit of some folks who want to split from the Democratic Party. We're deeply frustrated with the Democratic Party, but if we split, we might be leaving it to a worse fate. So anyway, that's my editorializing there for a second. Now, I want to know more about the history too, but I also want to talk about today and the future. What's your sense of really, is there any chance that we would actually split the Union?
I think there's definitely a chance. I think that our odds of staying together over the next 20 to 30 years are 50-50 at best, to be honest with you. Look what's going on today already. There's fighting, or nearly, there should be perhaps, between federal authorities and state and local authorities in the streets of American cities. You have a president who's essentially, abdicated his responsibilities with regards to the coronavirus. You have an election that could be hotly, even violently contested. And that's, it's only 2020. We have a long way to go. Could be a rocky decade. So I definitely think it's absolutely possible. There are a lot of people on both sides of the aisle who want to break away from the Union. In Texas, when it looked like Hillary Clinton was going to win in 2016, there was a lot of talk about that. I'm not saying that it was going to happen at the time, but then immediately afterward, when Trump won, there was in your own state of California. I think that this is a growing trend in American politics as it gets more and more dysfunctional. Just quickly going back to the abolitionist point, it's definitely possible that they would have still had slavery, but the abolitionists had an argument for why that would not be the case, that without the Constitution's guarantees of recovering fugitive slaves and putting down insurrections, that the price of slaves would plummet and ultimately start to disappear.
Yeah, not buying it. Look, on the one hand, Cascadia sounds appealing, although you just told me before we went on air that Southern California would not be included, in which case it sounds disastrous. But on the other hand, I hate to leave the rest of the Union to their own devices. So for folks who don't know, tell us what Cascadia is, and curious whether you're in favor of it. Well,
I don't live in Cascadia, so it's kind of not my decision to make. And there are many different versions of West Coast secession that could be enacted. You know, the New York Times said after the 2016 election that it made the Rocky Mountains look like a international border. So it could be everything west of the Rockies. And this has a long history. I go into this in the book about the idea that California and Oregon, this goes back to the 1840s, could form their own Pacific Republic. And a lot of people preferred that option. Jefferson, Daniel Webster even. So it's definitely been a constant threat throughout American history. The California flag says California Republic. You know, it's sort of a standing threat.
Yeah. Well, look, putting out aside the specific idea of Cascadia, if you put the West Coast together, California, Oregon, and Washington, it would be formidable. It would be one of the largest economies in the world, top 5. It would be wonderfully progressive. It sounds appealing if you're a progressive. What do I want to deal with Mississippi and Alabama for? And look, I don't know that you could find anyone tougher on Republican Party and Republican governors than me. And so I think those governors suck, and I think they've destroyed those states, and they keep asking for money from the rest of us while pretending that they're against us taking welfare. So I loathe them. But, Richard, if we did that, then imagine what happens to the poor people, you know, progressives, black people in Mississippi, Alabama. If the red states seceded, that would be a nightmare for minorities in those states, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. Or as you say, if the blue states seceded. Either way, I do think that it needs to be a question that we ask ourselves. How much are we willing to give up to keep the union together? And are we willing to see it break apart? I think this is kind of the question that we're always asking in our politics without really asking it. You know, the hashtag has gone around on Twitter, America or Trump. Well, what does that really mean? If the country chooses Trump, what does that mean? The end of America? What do we really mean by that? I think that we really mean disunion. And if so, we should talk explicitly and openly about that. And the other thing I'll say about that is yes, there would be massive costs, including for very vulnerable people, if the union broke apart. But what if they make the rest of us into Mississippi? But that kind of seems to be the way things are going. And there's been this tradition, anytime a secessionist movement on the progressive left or something, you know, that doesn't really apply to 19th century terms, has gotten going, there's been this idea that if we can't save the country, maybe we can save our own little part of it and you know, keep the idea of America going if the rest of the country gives up on our conception of it.
So I don't think that it's impossible, including from the left. Here's a fact pattern that where it could happen. Trump wins re-election, and he continues to do authoritarian tactics. The federal secret police spread out to all the states, start snatching up political opponents. I don't think that that's outlandish at all. In fact, I'd be really surprised if Trump didn't do that if he won re-election.
Absolutely.
In which case, I can see the West Coast saying, "What are we dealing with this BS for?" No. You're not going to send federal forces because they're no longer our forces. And if the West Coast seceded, it would be fantastically rich and fantastically progressive. So, that's an interesting fact pattern. But I don't want to leave the rest of the country to rot. So I can't countenance it. And I love the idea of a union. And so I can't stand that idea overall. But I can see it happening. But now let's talk about the logistics. Now, the more realistic possibility is that Trump loses, which is far, far, far more likely. And Republicans realize, oh, my God, we're never going to win another national election. There's a good chance Trump's going to lose North Carolina, Georgia, and Texas. And if he does, good night, Irene. The demographics have shifted enough that Republicans will very likely, if they stay in this form, never, ever win another presidential election. So in that case, I can see all those red states going, no. We tried authoritarianism. We tried to get a fascist in there to end democracy before we lost our demographic advantage. That didn't work. So we're going back to the idea of being on our own so that we could oppress people to our pleasure in our own states. Now, in that fact pattern, how would they do it and what would happen next?
Honestly, I don't see that happening after the 2020 election, certainly not on the Republican side. I just don't think it would go that quickly. I do think that over the next decade, I can see Republicans, as they did under Obama. You know, we had Rick Perry famously saying, "I love this union. I wouldn't want to give it up, but if the government, you know, becomes communist or something, we should secede." I think you'd see that again, certainly under a Biden presidency, and within a few years or election cycles, when they realize just how hopeless the situation is, perhaps they would pull the trigger. How would they do it? I don't know. We only have one instance in American history where somebody went through it, that there were plenty of threats, and that's what the book is about.
Richard Kreitner, the book is Break It Up. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Cenk.
2 easy ways to follow the Young Turks. One is hit the subscribe button down below. Then you're a TYT subscriber. And second is ring the bell. And when you do that on YouTube, you're notified of our videos.